Have you ever noticed that every love feels like a dream at first? That phase when everything is light, conversations flow, the touch is magical, and you're sure you've finally found the one. But suddenly, something changes. The lightness turns into pressure, the charm turns into silence, and what was once easy laughter turns into distance. And then comes the question everyone has asked themselves: why does love that started out so perfect always end in disappointment? The truth is, no one taught you what really happens after the infatuation phase. People keep repeating beautiful phrases about love, but almost no one understands what lies behind this overwhelming feeling. What Alan Watts explained, and what most ignore, is that romantic love, as we've learned to live it, is a dangerous game between ego and illusion. At first, we don't fall in love with the person. We fall in love with the idea we've created of them. In this video, you'll understand why love lifts you to the sky and then knocks you down without warning. You'll discover what's really behind this cycle of enchantment and frustration, and why so many relationships end in the same place: emptiness. If you've ever wondered why you love so much and yet feel like something is missing, stay until the end, because this explanation will change the way you see love, and maybe even save the next relationship you have. Now that you understand what really happens behind romantic love, everything changes. Because when you see what no one told you, the cycle of idealization, attachment, and frustration, you stop repeating the same mistakes and start living real relationships with awareness and freedom. This video revealed something most people spend their lives never discovering. Love doesn't disappoint. What disappoints is illusion. And that's why those who have made it this far deserve to continue evolving. Like the video to reinforce this message, and subscribe to the channel so you don't end up back where you started. Here, each new piece of content makes you see love, life, and the mind through a different lens, one that liberates, not restrains. This is the turning point that begins now. You know that beginning of a relationship that feels like something out of a movie? Everything flows so smoothly that you almost believe the universe has finally decided to reward you. Conversations fall into place, the other person's gaze has that different glow, and suddenly the world seems to make sense. You start to think you found what you were missing, that the time has finally come to experience a calm, mature love without games. This is where many people fall into the trap, confusing the enchantment of the beginning with true love. At first, what you see isn't the other person, it's your own projection. It's as if your heart created a perfect character and placed it in the body of whoever appeared. It's beautiful, it's intense, but it's also a grand illusion. You begin to notice that everything that attracts you most about that person is precisely what you most wanted to see in yourself. The way they speak, the way they look at you, even their flaws seem adorable. And of course, this captivates you, because deep down, it's as if you're in love with an idealized version of yourself. Then comes the question, did the love start out perfect, or did you just fall in love with the image you created? Alan Watts used to say that romantic love, as it exists in modern society, is a well-crafted trap set by the ego. It promises paradise, but in reality, it's the ego falling in love with the reflection it desires to see. That's why, in the first few months, everything seems magical. Not because the other person is extraordinary, but because they reflect what you want to believe. And the strangest thing is that no one realizes this while they're living. You think you've finally found the love of your life, and everything the other person does confirms your fantasy. When they compliment you, you feel special. When they seek you out, you feel indispensable. But little by little, the charm begins to change color. What was once sweet begins to annoy. The same attitudes that made you smile now irritate you, and you begin to wonder what happened. What changed? Has the person changed, or have you awakened from your illusion? That's when love begins to emerge from the dream and face reality. And this is the hardest moment, because it's when you realize that the perfect beginning wasn't real, it was a mental creation. Every relationship begins with a bit of blindness. The problem is that many want to remain blind. The truth is, we fall in love more for how the other person makes us feel than for who they really are. It's an emotional exchange that feeds the ego, not the heart. And when the ego is no longer fed, emptiness, confusion, and the infamous disappointment ensue. Love then becomes a broken mirror. The more you try to put the pieces back together, the more you cut yourself. But this disillusionment isn't the end. In fact, it's the first step towards seeing love clearly. But almost no one reaches this point because they give up beforehand. And do you know why? Because we've been taught to confuse intensity with love. When passion cools, we think it's over. But what's gone is the enchantment of fantasy. Real love hasn't even begun yet. It only emerges after the illusion dies. And that's where the most powerful lesson comes in. True love isn't what makes you float. It's what makes you see. And perhaps this is why so many people bounce from relationship to relationship, always searching for that initial thrill that never lasts. It's a kind of emotional addiction. The heart gets stuck on the perfect beginning, and the rest of the story becomes an eternal reunion with the same disappointment. Have you ever experienced this? Have you felt like everything was wonderful in the beginning, and then suddenly everything fell apart without explanation? If so, comment on the word mirror down here, because that's exactly what it is. Romantic love is the mirror that reflects the parts you want to see, and when the reflection changes, you think the love is over. But in reality, what's over is the illusion. This is the point that almost no one understands, and it's what separates those who mature emotionally from those who remain trapped in this cycle. Because when you understand that the perfect beginning is just a phase, you stop, endlessly seeking enchantment, and begin to value real connection. True love doesn't need perfection, it needs presence. And when you begin to see this, frustration gives way to understanding. That feeling of loss transforms into learning. You understand that love isn't about maintaining the magic of the beginning, but about learning to walk with the other, even when the glow of the new fades. But there is still a deeper truth that almost no one wants to face. A truth that explains why the infatuation phase must die so that true love can be born. When the charm starts to fade, that's when most people panic. That initial heat fades, the messages aren't as enthusiastic, and you start to feel a certain distance that wasn't there before. It's at this point that many try to save the relationship, forcing what's naturally changing. And this happens because we have a huge difficulty accepting one simple thing. Nothing in life is permanent. Passion is like a flame. If you try to keep it burning all the time, you end up suffocating it. And that's exactly what destroys so many seemingly perfect loves. In the beginning, everything happens spontaneously. You want to be close. You want to talk. You want to give yourself. But over time, fear sets in. Fear of loss. Fear of being replaced. Fear of no longer being desired. And when fear sets in, love begins to lose ground. People start living to secure what they feel. They want proof. They want promises. They want control. But love, when it becomes control, ceases to be love. Alan Watts said something that makes a lot of sense. Trying to hold on to something is the first step to losing it. And that's what happens. In the search for security, you suffocate the freedom that kept the connection alive. The mind wants stability, but the heart understands movement. To love is to accept that everything changes, and that the other person is free to change too. But most people haven't been taught to deal with this fluidity. Society has romanticized the idea that love must endure to be true, and this idea is one of the biggest causes of frustration. Love isn't a comfortable prison, it's a continuous choice. It's waking up every day and deciding to be there, even knowing nothing is guaranteed. But the ego hates this. It wants to possess, it wants certainty, it wants to transform the other person into something that reassures it. And when the other person starts to pull away, despair sets in. It's at this point that love begins to turn into pain. People confuse the end of euphoria with the end of connection. But what's really happening is that love is trying to evolve. The initial passion needs to die for mature love to be born. But the ego interprets this transition as loss. So when things change, the natural reaction is to try to reclaim what was lost, to return to the magical beginning. The problem is that by trying to relive the past, you prevent the present from becoming something new. It's curious how human beings resist impermanence. They want the other person to remain the same. They want feelings to be stable. They want happily ever after to exist outside of fairy tales. But the reality is that everything in life is a constant flux, and love is no different. When you understand this, you stop fighting against the natural and begin to live more lightly. It's not about giving up on the one you love. It's about stopping fighting a battle against time. Love only survives when it has room to breathe. And that's why many relationships end up becoming burdensome, because one or both of them begin to demand permanence from something that, by nature, is fleeting. Love isn't a picture to be kept in a frame. It's a river that needs to keep flowing. And the more you try to dam it, the more it loses strength. When you accept change, something new is born. Respect, admiration, friendship, mature love. That's where the relationship can evolve. But most never get there because they're too busy trying to relive what's already passed. Have you ever experienced this? Have you ever felt that despair of seeing the relationship change and not knowing what to do? Comment on the word change down here, because understanding this word is the first step to experiencing loves that truly last, not because they're eternal, but because they're free. And there's something deeper behind this need for control, something that explains why so many people confuse love with emotional dependence. This is one of the biggest mistakes people make, believing that love and attachment are the same thing. But they're not, and understanding this difference completely changes the way you relate. Love is freedom. Attachment is fear. Love wants the best for the other, even if it means letting them go. Attachment, on the other hand, wants to keep the other close, even if it means holding on, controlling, and suffocating. Love is born of trust. Attachment is born of insecurity. And the saddest thing is that most relationships end not because of a lack of love, but because of too much attachment. At first, attachment disguises itself well. It comes with beautiful phrases, affectionate gestures, and promises of forever. But behind it all, there's a silent need for control. It's that feeling that the other person is mine, that if they're not available, something's wrong, that if they pull away, it's because they don't love you enough. And that's when the relationship stops being light and starts to feel heavy. Have you ever felt this? That anxiety that creeps in when the other person takes a long time to respond. That insecurity that makes you observe every detail to see if anything has changed. That's not love. It's fear disguised as care. Attachment turns love into emotional dependence. You begin to measure your worth by how much the other person desires you. You begin to live for the sake of being needed, remembered, loved. And when the other person doesn't reciprocate, despair sets in. Love, on the other hand, doesn't need constant proof. It trusts, it breathes. To love is to allow the other person to be who they are, without trying to mold them, without demanding, without making demands. But the ego hates this idea. It wants guarantees. It wants predictability. It wants the other person to function according to its expectations. Alan Watts said that true love is like holding water in your hands. The tighter you squeeze, the more it slips through your fingers. And that's exactly it. When you try to control love, it disappears. When you relax and just feel it, it remains. The problem is that we live in a society that teaches the opposite. They say true love is the kind that can't live without the other. But that's not love. It's dependence. And dependence is the greatest enemy of genuine connection. True love doesn't seek to fill a void. It arises from completeness. When you love yourself, you don't need the other person to complete you. You simply share with them what already overflows. But as long as you believe the other person is responsible for your happiness, the relationship will be a tightrope between desire and frustration, because no one can carry the weight of being the reason for someone else's happiness. That's unsustainable. And the ironic thing is that attachment, born from the fear of loss, is precisely what destroys a relationship. When love becomes a demand, the other feels suffocated and begins to pull away. And the further they pull away, the more you try to hold on. It's a cycle that repeats itself until everything collapses. To love is to let go, but fear makes us hold on tight. That's why so many relationships end up imploding along the way, because people confuse being together with being dependent. Maybe you've experienced something like this. That moment when love turned into a struggle, when you felt like you were trying to hold on to something that was already slipping away. It's painful, but it's a learning experience. Comment on the word freedom down here to fix this in mind. True love doesn't need chains, it needs space to breathe. And there's an even deeper reason for this, something that's inside us, and that explains why so many people enter a relationship hoping to be saved. And here's where everything begins to reveal itself. The ego. It's the great imposter of love, because deep down, it doesn't want to love. It wants to be loved. It wants to be admired, desired, validated. The ego turns love into a showcase, where the goal stops being sharing and becomes proving something. This is why, even in seemingly happy relationships, many people experience constant neediness. The ego is never satisfied. It wants more attention, more affection, more confirmation. And when the other person doesn't deliver in the right measure, frustration sets in. The ego doesn't seek connection, it seeks a mirror. It wants to see in the other's gaze a reflection of its importance. When the other praises, the ego grows. When the other withdraws, the ego feels rejected. The problem is that love doesn't survive when it becomes a stage for the ego to act out. Because the ego loves the idea of being loved, but it runs away from the true act of loving. True love requires vulnerability, and the ego hates that. It wants to be in control. It wants to dominate the game. It wants to win. Therefore, when love begins to challenge the ego, it reacts with fear. How many times have you seen someone say, "I'll do anything for this person," and yet live in suffering? It's the ego disguised as altruism. It gives but expects to receive in return. It surrenders itself, but deep down, it wants recognition. And when it doesn't come, it gets hurt. The ego measures love in exchanges, in rewards, in responses. But genuine love doesn't need to be measured. It simply exists. True love doesn't seek compensation because it understands that loving is already complete in itself. Alan Watts explained that the ego is an illusion created by the mind to give the feeling of control over something that is by nature unpredictable. And love is exactly the opposite of that. It's surrender, it's uncertainty, it's risk. That's why the ego suffers so much when it loves. It can't stand not having guarantees. It wants labels, promises, contracts. It wants to transform love into something safe, predictable, logical. But love isn't a plan, it's a plunge. And when the ego tries to rationalize what's emotional, the feeling loses strength. This is when the games begin. The ego begins to test the other person, gauge interest, and manipulate emotions to feel like it still has control. It wants to be desired, but doesn't want to show vulnerability. It wants to be important, but is afraid to give itself up. And the result is a tiring relationship full of ups and downs, where love becomes a silent competition to see who needs it less. And the worst part is that no one wins this game. Everyone gets hurt. When the ego is in control, love ceases to be a meeting and becomes a disguised war. A war for attention, for power, for validation. And the most tragic thing is that people think they're fighting for love, when in fact they're fighting for their own reflection. The ego makes you believe that love is being chosen, when in reality, love is choosing, every day, consciously, even when the other person doesn't give you what you expected. And this is where many people awaken. When the ego begins to become frustrated, the mask falls. You realize that the love that seemed so intense may never have been love at all. It was just your ego wanting to feel alive through the other. And when that reality hits, it hurts. It hurts because you realize you were looking for love in the wrong place, outside of yourself. Now think about it. How many times have you tried to be perfect to deserve love? How many times have you stopped being yourself to keep someone around? This is the ego in action. It makes you believe you need to be something to be loved, when true love only exists when you are authentic. If this has happened to you, comment on the word ego down here, because recognizing this is the first step to freeing true love. But the most interesting part comes now, because when the illusion of the ego collapses, when you finally see the other person without the filter of your expectations, that's when the strongest shock of all happens. This is where the castle of idealizations begins to crumble. After a while you realize that the perfect person who initially enchanted you has quirks, flaws, and weaknesses, and that not everything is as it seemed. At first, love is a blank canvas on which the heart paints its fantasies. But when everyday life arrives, the paint begins to run and reveal the real picture. And it's at this moment that most people become disappointed, not because the other person has changed, but because the illusion is shattered. What hurts isn't what the other person says, it's seeing what you believed cease to exist. Idealization is a silent addiction. We want to believe we've found someone flawless, someone who will heal old pains and fill the voids life has left. But love isn't medicine for the soul. It's a mirror, and like any mirror, it sometimes shows what you don't want to see. That's why when the mask falls, it hits you. The same look that once made you feel at peace now irritates you. The attitudes that were once cute become childish. And the voice that once soothed you begins to tire you. You're not falling out of love, you're just seeing it. And seeing hurts. It hurts because it requires you to face your own projections. The disappointment that comes at this stage is actually the end of the illusion. You're not losing love, you're gaining vision. But almost no one understands this. Most people see the end of idealization as the end of the relationship. And often, that's when people give up. They think the love is over when in fact it was just beginning to become real. True love begins when you stop trying to mold the other person into your fantasy and start accepting them as they are, with their light and shadows, their virtues and flaws. Alan Watts said that no one truly loves another person until they see clearly who they are. And that's an uncomfortable truth, because love doesn't flourish in illusion, it grows in the soil of acceptance. But the ego doesn't like acceptance. It wants to adjust. It wants to correct. The other person, it wants to improve the relationship. It wants to return to the magical phase. But the truth is, love doesn't have to be magical all the time to be true. Sometimes love is silent, imperfect, and even confusing. And it's precisely in this imperfect space that it proves its strength. How many times have you experienced this reality check? Have you ever experienced that moment when a relationship that seemed like a fairy tale turned into a minefield of petty irritations and doubts? This is the point at which most people break up, and a minority mature, because only those who understand that love isn't the absence of flaws, but the ability to endure despite seeing them all, can get through this phase. The collapse of idealization is the most important test of love. It's the moment when "I love you because it makes me feel good" needs to transform into "I love you even when it's not easy." And this leap is what separates immature love from conscious love. It's here that love stops being a mirror and becomes an encounter. It's here that you learn to love the other, not for what they represent, but for who they truly are. And if you've ever felt this, if you've ever experienced the shock of discovering that the person of your dreams was actually human, comment on the word reality down here. Because accepting reality is what frees you from disappointment. The pain of seeing the illusion end is the price you pay for experiencing true love. And it's precisely after this moment that a new understanding emerges, something that will completely change the way you see love, and even your own disappointments. This is where everything starts to make sense. Disappointment, as painful as it may seem, is not the end. It's the beginning of clarity. When you stop idealizing, hoping, and projecting, love finally has room to become real. And it's at this moment that many give up, believing love is over. But in truth, what's gone is the enchantment of illusion. True, love only emerges after the fantasy dies. It's the love that sees, that understands, that accepts. The love that doesn't depend on promises, but on presence. Disappointment, oddly enough, is the most honest teacher love could have. It shows you that the other person didn't come to complete you, but to reveal you. You discover that love isn't a contract for eternal happiness, but a living experience that changes and matures over time. And it's at this point that many realize what Alan Watts always taught. Love is an art of letting the other person be who they are, and freeing yourself from the need for control. When you understand this, the weight of love lessens. You stop trying to hold on and start learning to feel. It's at this stage that love becomes awareness. You stop looking at the other person with the perspective of, "What can they give me?" and start looking at them with the perspective of, "What can I experience with them?" You understand that disappointment isn't a flaw, but a cleansing. It sweeps away excessive idealization, fear of loss and attachment disguised as love, and what's left afterward is something much purer. The love that transcends disappointment is the love that doesn't need perfection to exist. It's the love that adapts, that understands silences, that isn't frightened by change. When you reach this point, something inside you changes. You stop looking for the love that promises you heaven and start appreciating the love that teaches you how to walk on earth. Because the true miracle isn't finding someone to save you, but finding someone who walks with you even when the ground is shaking. And that only happens when you understand that love isn't about the other person. It's about what awakens within you. Now everything makes more sense, doesn't it? This video opened your eyes to something few people have the courage to see. Love that begins perfectly and ends in disappointment isn't a failure. It's a process of awakening. You understood how ego, attachment, and idealization distort love until it turns into pain, and how awareness restores lightness, freedom, and truth. If this content made you rethink your relationships, it's a sign that something within you is changing. And when something changes within you, the world around you changes with it. Like the video to reinforce this message and share this energy by liking and subscribing to the channel. This way, what transformed you today can also transform others who are still trapped in the illusion of perfect love. Write your message in the comments. Conscience, because that's exactly what happens when you understand what love really is. And get ready. The next video will show you something almost no one realizes. What really makes love last when the passion has faded?